Abhinav,
Hi, Fergus. Good morning.
how you doing, my friend?
Good, good. How are you?
I'm good.
Good, good. How are things there back in Michigan?
I'm actually in Orange County. I'm in California now.
Oh, great.
So it's what time is it now? It's just 9 a.m. So it's
Right.
perfect.
So, how's the COVID situation there? Is everything settled or it's still?
It's so hard to know. It's so hard to know and it's so hard to know who to believe. But thankfully, I've been fine. I did get COVID. I was working with one of the NFL teams and picked it up
Oh,
after
okay.
traveling from them, but I was fine. So I
Hmm.
was lucky. How are things in India as a whole?
Yeah, the situation is such that people don't care anymore. They're just roaming around the streets without masks.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
one of the reports, I think, from the Ministry of Health came out a couple of days back, and they were saying that by 2021 Feb, almost half the population in India would have uh, contracted COVID.
And what's the mortality rate like? Do
Very
people
low,
generally survive or okay,
very low. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
okay,
Unless they are 60 plus. Because in India, it's high rate of diabetes and heart diseases. So if there is some sort
oh,
of
okay,
comorbidity, then yeah, that's a big issue here. So
yes,
children
yeah,
below the age of 10 and anyone who's above 50, 55, it's a huge risk here.
yes. That seems to be the same across the board. I think it'll encourage people to be a lot healthier or try to be healthier.
Yeah.
Um, you know, that's what I that's maybe one of the side effects. So
Yeah.
do you have a gym yourself, Abby?
I do. I do. I run a business on my own, but at the moment I'm contracted with one of the institutes, as I was mentioning in the mail. So
Mm-hmm.
we currently deal with track and field, boxing, wrestling, and judo. So I lead the boxing program here.
Oh,
So
excellent.
during the lockdown, which was between March to June, we were completely shut, but things are back to normal now. But there is no
Yes. Yeah.
there's no guarantee about the camps or any tournaments
Yeah.
whatsoever.
Yeah.
We might have an Olympic trials approximately around Feb because we already have about 4 people qualified for Tokyo. Uh,
Okay.
yeah, so there's only one person allowed per category in boxing, so the others might just
Yes.
go for a trial. And so the team is currently in Italy right now. They're just going through a camp, so they might come back and then give a trial here for Olympics.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Well, hopefully it can move forward.
Um,
I'm trying to think. There was a when I was at Blackburn Rovers, a family, was it the Venke family bought Blackburn
I'm
Rovers?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm just trying to remember. I think they were Indian investors. It's a while ago. I was trying to think earlier.
The sound
Eh,
Venki sounds like Indian. Yes.
yeah, yeah. So I think that was the family. I don't know if they still own Blackburn, but
Mm.
yeah,
It's so hard with the athletes because there's no guarantee about when the camp's going to start, when there'll be trials. So they've lost their motivation. Like it was bang on right after the lockdown, but since there's nothing to look forward to, we just
yeah.
coming to the gym and then just training and then just going back to their rooms.
No, I can imagine. I can imagine. So where are you now? Are you in? You're in New Delhi?
No, I'm in Bangalore, Karnataka, the southern part of India.
Oh, okay.
Have you been to India?
I've never been to India. No, no. It's a country that's on my list. At some stage, I would like to visit. I've never visited.
Yeah.
Been many
So
other places, but not India.
the biggest sport would be cricket, obviously.
Yes, yes,
Yeah, all the other
yeah,
sport is probably like 10 percentage of what cricket would be.
yeah. India and Pakistan, they like the cricket. That's for sure.
Yeah. So when I talk to the S&Cs and then when I tell them that I am with the combat sport, they have no idea what I'm talking about. For them, it's just cricket and nothing else.
Yes, yeah. No, I
Yeah.
can understand that. I can
Yeah.
definitely understand that.
Anyway,
So
thank
what
you
do you
so
want to
much for
talk about
making
this
the time
morning?
for this.
Oh, no problem. Happy to. Happy to. There's always been great people have helped me on my way. So if I can pass it, pay it forward, more than happy to.
It's an honor to have you on the show. Thank you so much.
You've had Mike Boyle, so nobody can follow Mike.
Yeah. So I was thinking, I asked Mike also this question. Like when someone decides to write a book, it's a huge commitment. At what point did you decide that you should write a book? Because I'm sure it was just not a year process. You would have started thinking about it way before you even started writing your chapters down. So how and when did it happen for you?
So I think for me, and I don't know, I would have liked it. I haven't heard Mike's interview, but or his answer. But for me, a lot of it is putting my thoughts and systems and processes together, so that I understand them, and then I can share them with either staff or people who I'm working with or consulting with. Because very often when you're working with coaches, it's a long process to explain what it is you want to do. And my interest has always been in team sports. So I'm always trying to pull ideas together. And so a lot of my writing, I don't sit down writing for someone else. I sit down really with my own ideas, trying to formulate them, put them into a system. So Game Changer was just a collection of thoughts, ideas, and systems, conclusions that I had come to. And I was trying to put them together with teams and coaches that I was working with and had worked with, because I felt there was nothing else out there that was pulling everything together. There are lots of great books, writings, experts in segmented areas. But at the end of the day, when you're standing in front of a group of coaches or a team, you have to be able to play all of the keys on the piano, and you have to be able to pull them all together. So I really write for myself. Their thoughts and systems that I have pulled together, and then it's helpful to share them and throw them out there for everyone to pull apart, to digest, to critique. People sometimes think that you write a book and you're saying this is the only way to do it, and it's not like that at all. For me, it's this is how I'm thinking, or by the time the book gets out, it's probably 5 years since this is what you're doing, but this is this is how my brain was looking at this problem. You put it out there for people to take, to use, to interpret, and to improve on. People like Cam Joss, Stu McMillan, lots of other people, take some of the ideas, dismiss others, use them, improve on them. And that's the exciting part for me, because, that's where you continue to learn. But if nobody writes, if nobody puts thoughts out there, then, nobody's going to improve.
So how do you gather the courage to put together such a book? I mean, your book is... So at what point do you decide?
Oh, I really, I did care. I did care what other people thought when I was much younger, but I really don't care what people think in terms of criticism. So I don't see it as a courageous thing. For me, it's this is what I believe. I'm being, honest about. Okay, this is how I look at things. I'm going to put it out there. Yeah, lots of people are going to criticize it, but I had a brilliant conversation with someone. They were asking me for advice yesterday about this and about criticism. Look, if you're putting something out there and that's what you honestly believe, and somebody criticizes it, generally that's their problem. They've got some other issue or some other concern. So I don't see it honestly as courageous. For me, it's if this can help a few people, brilliant. If people can take from it, improve on it, I'm going to learn. And it's about trying to further the industry and ultimately help people, work better, do their job better, and have a greater impact on their athletes and on the the industry as such.
Great. So I was watching one of your interviews with Brian McKenzie a couple of days back.
Oh yes, yeah.
It was a brilliant one. In that, I sort of explored a little more into one of the points that you mentioned about coaches who should strive to be a generalist before they start specializing in something. So could you expand upon it a little more? What are your
Yeah,
thoughts?
yeah. It was actually at Brian's birthday last night.
Oh, is
I think
it?
he's 21 again, so he tells me. But no, I think, look, one of the mistakes that, oh man, I've made so many mistakes, but one of the mistakes I think I made early on was running down particular rabbit holes and becoming either a specialist in strength or in speed. And when you're working, again, I can only speak to team sports really, but it does carry over into individual sports. When you only see, when the only tool that you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And you start to think that that's the only way that you can do things. And as you start to learn more about performance as a whole, you realize, okay, it's more than just speed, or it's more than just tracking, or it's more than just one particular aspect. And then as you start to learn more and more about performance as well, and you learn about the importance of considering the person and the human, then things take on another level again. So the more that you understand performance as a whole, then you can choose which area you want to specialize in, or which area perhaps you're weakest in, or perhaps your athletes need to learn more. And one other very important point I think for coaches is, particularly if you're working with a few coaches or in a group, generally a lot of coaches tend to think in a similar way.
Yeah.
So if it's a sport that's largely strength or power, everybody has an interest in that. But if you want to add value to the group, maybe, the best area for you to provide assistance in is not in that area. Let's look at another area where, as a whole, the summation of the experiences that the group of coaches provide improves the athletes. That's certainly something that I've tried to look at. If I've been working with coaches who are brilliant strength and power coaches, well, maybe I should spend a little bit more time studying mobility and movement, because when I can add that, that's going to add more value, because we're already very, very strong in that other area. And that's something that I've carried over a lot to staff auditing and to looking at departments and structures. So with different teams and groups now that I either consult with or review, it's really about, okay, helping each person improve, but then looking at the group as a whole and saying, as a group, here are some areas of not weakness, but opportunity. And perhaps there are people in your group that can learn about those, so that the group as a whole provide an experience that is more complete for the athlete. That's very, very important in team sports and with groups of coaches.
Right. So in India, the pathway for an S&C would completely look different than what it would be in US or UK, because we hardly have any universities offering undergrad or postgrad programs in strength and conditioning or exercise science per se. So there's no one starting point for an S&C coach. So I started off as a personal trainer, then I slowly became a full-time S&C coach. So at a very early stage of your career, how do you think you can tell someone, or at least give them an insight, that you should also look at the art part of sports science and not just the science part of it? So how, for a very young coach, how would you put that point across? Of course, if they read your book, they would get a complete idea about how it should be done.
Yeah, but I think, I think particularly over the last, say, 25 years, there's been, or possibly even shorter, there's been a lot of focus and emphasis on very structured, traditional educational pathways to becoming a coach. But if you look at all of the truly great coaches, or at least many of them, very, very few of them have followed that path. And you go back to Bill Walsh, Lombardi, right up into recent times, very few coaches have followed a structured, what we would call academic route to being a good head coach. Many of the strength and conditioning coaches as well, the really, really good ones, the experienced ones, guys like Dan Paff, Kelvin Giles, many of those guys who have, actually won and are still coaching and still being sought out, they didn't go through a traditional structured academic pathway. And many of them started out just like many of the coaches that you're talking about in India and wherever. They started out working with athletes first and foremost and learning. And I truly believe that when you look at strength and conditioning, when you look at other professions that are in essence vocations, that deal primarily roles, professions that deal with people and care for people, the best route and the best pathway is more akin to an apprenticeship model that encourages a balance between academic and practical, and is an iterative process. That to me is the best model for this type of, I tend to call it a vocation because it's very different to just a profession, perhaps like accounting or civil engineering or some of those roles, because your relationship skills, your ability to communicate, empathize, problem solve, those skill sets are more important, particularly in S&C, in team sport or in any kind of sport, than, like I said, some of the other structured professions. So the same pathway is not going to be as beneficial. So many of the best coaches, that I've worked with or been around, have either, perhaps some of them have come through that structured academic format, but they've really developed a lot of their skill sets working with athletes or even just sedentary people in private gyms. Their skill sets in terms of relationship building, communication, are far better than many of the best academically qualified exercise science physiology students. And I see it now even today, when you're looking to build a staff, there are a lot of really good, I would call them, gems that are out there that, don't perhaps have this structured academic list of qualifications, but have brilliant people skills, and they've got a hunger and a drive to continue to learn. And those are the ones who generally have the greatest impact long term.
So, looking back to your career, what was the point that you realized that it's a people business and not specifically the technicalities of?
I think there were a few. I think I had some great mentors. I had some incredible mentors. People like Dan Path and others who I would have had conversations with them early on. I didn't come through an exercise physiology program, and I remember saying, look, maybe should I go back and do? I remember there's another guy, a professor, Bruce Davies, brilliant physiologist in Cardiff, and I remember saying to him, I'd already had a PhD in computer-based optimization. I remember saying to Bruce, should I go back and do an exercise science PhD? And he said, no, why would you want to go back and do that? You've already shown that you understand the academic process. You've been working for years in sport. Why would you want to waste your time going back and doing it? But I had a lot of mentors who encouraged me to spend my time primarily working with athletes, making mistakes, learning, studying. I think that was very important. And so, like, for example, when people like you come and ask me to do a podcast or do something, I always say yes and try and fit it in, because there were so many people like that who helped me and had no reason to help me, other than they wanted to pass it on. So I think for me, learning and realizing that it was a people business, very much came about learning from those world-class experts and reaching out to them, listening to, reading, generally it was reading interviews that they had done. And also coaches. There was a brilliant coach, Scott Johnson, an Australian, and I remember going to him with sheets of GPS data, and I remember him saying to me, Fergus, I went back a number of times, and my question was, Scott, why are you not really interested or using this, after a number of weeks. And Scott was brilliant. He said, Fergus, none of it's useful. And I said, okay, so why is this not helpful? And he said, okay, well, this number or this stat is not going to help me. I can't do anything with it. This doesn't help me. And I said, okay, what would be helpful? So he gave me a series of stats that were important to his game plan or characteristics. So I went away then and figured out, okay, based on what he wanted, how could I produce a number that would give an indication or would be similar? And like I remember, for example, for him, he wanted to know how long players were out of the game. And one of the numbers that I had not been using, but figured out how to find it, was how much time players spend flat on the ground. And from that, then I could indicate to him, okay, these players are not likely to be getting up off the ground quick enough in rugby. And that was one of the key, numbers that he used. But it was only because of Scott taking the time, to critique me, and you got to put your ego in your pocket. Nobody likes to be told that this is wrong or that's wrong. Yeah. But it was a brilliant number. It was like, it was a brilliant metric to use. And I thought, you know what, that's ingenious. But there are coaches like Scott and others who have, can see how to use sports science or strength and conditioning, examples like that. And, you get so many learning opportunities.
Right. So this is a hypothetical question. So if ever you find yourself in a position where your vision is not aligned with what the head coach wants to see, what would be your thoughts and advice to deal with that circumstance?
Oh, that happens all the time, but at the end of the day, I used to joke with Jim Harbaugh when we were at the 49ers. Like, he would ask me this, that, and I would say, look, Jim, I'll give you my opinion, but you get paid $5 million a year to make the decision ultimately. Like, at the end of the day, it's the coach's decision, and you support them. And there comes a point, particularly when you're working with a coach, it's almost like it's like a curve, and there's a tipping point where, this is my opinion, and if you have to push back, you'll push back, and it gets to a point where you see the coach, or the coach makes his decision. That's it. Now you're back. You're going to support his decision one way or the other, and you can't sulk. At the end of the day, look at, you have a role, and you're going to. It's like with any meeting, you'll discuss it, you'll have the conversation, reaches a point, and then it's on to you support whatever decision they make. And I've worked in organizations, I remember before, where I have very, very little influence on what has happened. So you find the area that you can influence the most, and you put 100% of your effort into that. There might be other areas where you can only influence 10, 15, 20%, but you find out what that topic is, and throw all of your energy into that. I think for young coaches, I think that's a really, really good question, because you come across some coaches who are young and they want to impact this, and they think the coach is wrong. And look, figure out, say your piece, back it up, support it. If you don't convince the coach, then you support him. And there's two things you take away from it. One, did you present your position properly? Could you have done it better? Did you get emotional, or did you understand how to communicate with them? And if you did all of that and they still decided to go in a different route, well, then you've done your bit. Support the coach. Now, if you didn't, go back and figure out, how do they like to be presented? What other people come to them and get their position presented well? Like, are they presenting it in a different way? Do they approach them at a different time of the day? Did you force your way in? Did you ask them questions or her questions first? Like, those are the things that you need to consider before you get, your nose all bent out of shape and get all annoyed. Understand how you can make a difference.
Absolutely. So one of the best advices that I received from my head S&C when I took over the boxing program was, he sat me down and he said, do not try to make a wholesale change in the program. There might be something certain things that when you look from a technician's perspective that may not be ideal, but look at the culture of the sport. If going for a 10K run every Saturday is not harmful enough for the athletes, just don't try to change it. Don't try to give your bit of advice to the coach, because he will no way listen. And your time under task for about good 2 years will afford you the opportunity to make some changes. Until then, just do what you're supposed to do.
That's great. That's great advice. Like, I mean, we used to do this Michigan Mile, which makes no sense for players the day after a game, but that was what was being done. And there are cultural aspects to it. So you pick your battles. Sometimes there would be, for example, training done that is detrimental to the players. But okay, if you can't affect it directly, well, then affect all of the recovery and support that as best you can. And one of the other really important points, I think, and I put into Game Changer, a lot of people miss it, but there's a pathway. There's a route to actual improvement. It's not just walk in and make changes, all on day 1 or on day 5. Make sequential changes, and also recognize the priority. Like, there's some big things you really need to fix. Take care of those first. And also, if you think in terms of second and third order thinking, you can make one change that could impact 2 or 3 others without having to make 5 changes. You just make one key change and the other ones will fall into place. So yeah, no, I couldn't agree with that advice more.
Absolutely. So you were mentioning about your non-academic route in the context of sports science. So it's a counterfactual question. If you had taken the traditional sports science route, how would have things looked different in your career? Have you ever reflected upon what happened during your early stages?
I've never really played the parallel universe thought, or I've never followed that down. But I think I'm glad I didn't, to be honest with you, because there's so many people who. So in Ireland at the time, the year that I started at university was the second year of the sports science program. So nobody had graduated yet. Some of my friends went and did it. I don't know many of them who are still coaching in sport or who have worked at the professional level. I think that there are a lot of benefits to taking the path or the road less traveled. I think that, I think there are a lot of pros and cons to following the traditional route, but I think you can get there, going both ways. It probably just wouldn't have suited me, or didn't suit me. For me, it was about learning and about just following passion and an interest that ended up, working at different teams and sports. But I don't think it would have happened if I had gone the traditional route. I think one of the values of taking a non-traditional route is you're never quite sure. Like, things are presented now in academia that if you do this degree, this master's, this PhD, that job is waiting for you. It doesn't work like that. That could take you 10 years. Industry's changed. And over that 10 years, you've not really had great opportunities to develop those key interpersonal skills that can amplify your ability to do your job. And I'm not saying, I've them perfected, but I think you become more aware of them.
So in one of your interviews, I remember you mentioning about your visit to Charlie Francis, where you had 20 questions and then you came back with no answers whatsoever. So the whole reason why I'm doing this entire podcast is to connect with the wider group within the S&C and bring the global figures to India. And also for me personally to learn how to ask better questions. So what are your thoughts on that? Your skill to ask.
That was a really eye-opening moment for me. I had read Charlie's books. I think we'd spoken on the phone a few times. I'd watched his videos, thought I understood his philosophy. And so I had key questions I wanted to learn. I'm flying back on the plane and looking through these questions to see, okay, how many of them did I get to? Because I'd forgotten over the days. I just got dragged into this mind-blowing experience trying to learn and drink from a fire hose. But I realized I hadn't got answers to any of those questions. And um, what dawned on me was that I had gone asking the wrong questions. I didn't understand. And even despite all of the reading, it wasn't until I had actually sat down and truly understood what he meant, but also the reasoning behind his system. So, for example, tempo, like why tempo is such a key part of his program. And then when you subsequently understand the why, you can realize, okay, well, tempo is brilliant for track athletes, but may not be the best thing for team sport, or there are other ways to get that effect that can be more efficient in team sport. And those are that's why I always say to young coaches or people who try and reach out to you to learn from you, like, I always try and make time, because there's a lot of value, no matter how well I can write something or try and explain it. There's a lot of value in understanding how the other person interprets what you're saying. And when you get that opportunity to ask the why, now you start to ask, the right questions. So yeah, I had no answers because I was asking the wrong questions. I didn't actually understand it before I went to sit down and visit with the expert. And it's the same with so many coaches, same with Louis Simmons and others. When you talk to them and you try and understand, so why do you do it like that? Why is it always this day? When you understand the why, then you can start to change, things for your benefit. Because, for example, like a Dan Paff or a Louis Simmons, or they train, track and field largely, or that's been there. So when you understand, when they present something from that perspective, when you understand the principle, you can apply the principle in your situation, which is, going to be very, very different to theirs.
So how was your thought process like when you decided to reach out to Louis Simons or Dan Papp during a very early stage of your career, where if I put myself in your shoes and if I feel that I'm not good enough to be there and then ask them certain questions, I would have held myself back. So what was your thought process like?
Yeah, I'm trying to think like, I mean, one of the first guys I went to visit was a guy called Ashley Jones, brilliant strength coach. Really a genius, to be honest, in my mind. He has a brilliant balance of science and art. And actually watching him coach, I learned probably more from watching his interaction with. So I'm trying to think back to that stage. For me, it was, I just wanted to learn. Like, I mean, whatever interest and passion I had for learning, I just still do, you know, uh, you know, that, I think that just puts any fear. Like, I mean, I had a brilliant conversation with trading psychologist too, actually, over the last year. And like, you mean, just the learning opportunities and how kind so many people are and how generous they are with their time. You learn so much from them. And yeah, like, so I don't really have a fear. There's so much I don't know. There's so much I want to know. I want to learn. And so I guess that overrides any fear that I might have of reaching out. Like, somebody's going to say no to you? I think only one person's ever said no to me. And you're polite and you ask. The other thing too is, like, I mean, you're not, you're not asking for something for nothing. Like, I mean, you want to help someone if you can return the favor. There's a brilliant girl in Canada recently. I needed some help from. I want some advice, and we talked for almost 2 hours, and she was just brilliant, so helpful. And then they'll reach out to you for some help later on, and it's just learning. You're just helping each other.
Absolutely. Have you ever had a chance to, even consider coming to India, or has any opportunities come your way?
When I was at Blackburn Rovers years ago, like, I think I was telling you, I think it was the Venky family bought Blackburn, and I think I was due to visit India back then, it never happened. I'd love to visit India. Like, I mean, there's such a great tradition of sport. When I was in Australia working with Australian cricket, of course, like, I mean, conversations came up about battles and competition with cricket in India. And again, cricket is something, it was a sport I knew nothing about before I went to Australia. But there's a little bit of interest in India and cricket, a little bit of passion. This understatement of the year. But yeah, I would love to visit it. I would love to visit at some stage.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we haven't had any conferences from organizations like NSCA or UKSCA happen, even in a smaller scale. So we had one conference that was supposed to happen on site from ASCA last year, but it got cancelled due to COVID. So they had it converted online. And I think even the international conference is happening online, which is due to happen in November, I guess. So hopefully we'll see.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I think some of my colleagues in the NBA are speaking at that. So if that's the same one, that would be good. But yeah, I think, like, I think for now, so much is remote. It'll be good when people can travel more freely, because again, at so many of those conferences, I forget which. Oh, I went to a conference. I went to a conference in Boston, and I was speaking at it. And in the morning when I got there, I bumped into one or two people. I ended up missing the first few talks. After I spoke, then one of the guys who wanted to speak to me went out and we chatted for a bit. I missed the rest of the afternoon because it's the conversations and the people you meet, and you're sitting having coffee, or you're in the bar afterwards, and you're scribbling on napkins, and that's where the real learning takes place. There's some very good presentations, but it's the conversations outside. That's where the real learning, and that's where you build relationships with coaches. You hear about how they're solving things. You pick up some brilliant ideas. That's the value of getting off your backside and going to visit, and to go to those conferences.
Absolutely. Hopefully we'll have more conferences coming up in India in the next couple of years.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So so are there any parting thoughts from your end for the young? So the entire S&C community itself is young. It's still in its infancy in India. So what would be your advice to the entire community in terms of finding the right balance between being the science guy and the art guy? So what would be your thoughts on it?
I think there are a few things that have always guided me. One is, at the end of the day, it comes down to results. You can talk all you want, you can read all you want, you can write as many papers as you want, but at the end of the day, can you help the team improve, and can you make a difference? And that's really all that coaches, general managers, organizations are interested in. And in order to do that, you have to have a balance of science and art, whether it's communication. And a lot of it, when you're at the so-called cutting edge, or when you're at the bleeding edge, when you're there day to day, comes down to problem solving. And can you do that? And if you can't develop that ability to adapt, to problem solve in any organization, doing some work with Fortune 50 company at the moment, and it's the very same thing. When things become chaotic and a little bit disruptive, like, can you solve problems quickly with small teams? And if you can't do that, then you've got really big problems. And those are the skills I think that young coaches need to learn. Get out there, even if you're not working full time with people, make sure you're spending some time, if it's at the weekend. And it doesn't matter what kind of demographic they are. If you can only help train, in the older demographic, do that. You will learn so much from them. You learn about relationships, communication skills, listening skills, self-talk, those things you will learn, presentation, that will carry over into sport, whatever level that you end up working in.
Absolutely. Well, is there a new book in the pipeline? I remember you mentioning about a book called Protocol in one of the podcasts.
Yeah, I'm working on, I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm actually working on 5 different books at the minute. And I've got got hoping to have one out early next year. Might be one out by Christmas. But yeah, so yeah, there's just so many ideas and thoughts that I want to share. And again, like I said, these are thoughts and perspectives that I have, and I enjoy sharing them because the feedback, the critique that I get from them are really, really helpful for me, and they help my growing and my growth as a coach. So I'm grateful for any feedback I get. And the last one, the Happiness Handbook, I've got so many just messages, private messages from people who got so much reward from it, and that, to me, that's a success. I remember Steve Peters, who wrote the Chimp Paradox. I remember him telling me that before the book was published, he said, if I get 10 people who tell me they got value from it, he said it's a success. He said that was his approach, and the book was such a huge success. But it's a wonderful way to a wonderful mindset to have.
Hindi being the most spoken language in the entire globe, Mike Boyle was asking me if there's an opportunity to translate his book to Hindi. So we'll see.
Mike's smart. Mike has his book translated into so many different languages already. So that would be.
Is there a translated version of your book in any other language?
You know what? I don't know, actually. I know it's Polish and Russian, but I don't know about Hindi. Maybe we start with 59 lessons. That might be an easier one to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah, happy for anyone to do that.
Absolutely. I'll look around and ask few people if we can get that done.
Brilliant, Davey. Thank you.
And whenever we get a chance to have you in India, it will be an absolute honor and pleasure.
Thank you. Look forward to it, David. Look forward to it.
And I cannot thank you enough for making the time for this. It's an absolute pleasure to have
Anytime.
you.
Anytime. Thank you for asking me. Thank you for having me on. Take care.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you.